Hi, my name is Scott Griswold, and I'm so happy to welcome you to this portion of Reach the World ASAP. I have the privilege of working with ASAP Ministries supporting national workers in Southeast Asia and other places. These are people who are daily out there showing God's love in very tangible ways to the poor people. They're also telling them incredibly good news of salvation. Today I want you to join me in thinking about how Jesus cares for people that others despise. With that topic, I normally think of Jesus and the leper, but I want to visit a different story from Jesus' life with you, a strange story. Do you remember these words? Can't I have some crumbs? Even a dog under the table is allowed to lick up what falls to the ground. It's one of the strangest stories we have about Jesus. He was always so kind, so patient with everybody, and willing to be anybody's friend. But in this story, he actually appears rude. The story is told in Matthew chapter 15, verse 21 to 28. Jesus and his disciples are out in the area of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman came up and started pleading with Jesus. "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David, my daughter is severely demon-possessed." The Bible says, he answered her not a word, nothing. Maybe he just kept walking. Apparently she kept asking, because the next thing we're told is that the disciples came and said, "Send her away. She keeps crying out after us." Now, what was going on? This lady was a Canaanite. She was one of those idol-worshiping, pig-eating, awful people that Israel was supposed to destroy back in Joshua's day. The Jews did not like them. The Jews did not want to be with them. And that included the disciples. It seemed to the disciples that Jesus was right with them in his attitude too. They even heard him say, "I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." And Jesus kept walking. But this lady had a big problem. Spirits had taken away her child. She still had her there in the body, but basically her little girl was gone. The mother knew Jesus had the power to do something, and she wasn't going to go away without a fight. She ran ahead and fell down on her knees in a position of worship. "Lord, help me." And finally, Jesus stopped and acknowledged her. It's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. Oh, she'd been treated like a dog before. The Jews considered her race unclean. They avoided them in the marketplace. They watched carefully if they happened to touch them. They were the children of Abraham, the children of God. The others were dogs. Picture her now. She doesn't move. She's on her face. "Yes, Lord, yet even the little dogs eat the crumbs, the ones that fall from their master's table." She's willing to be called a dog, to be nothing, as long as she can get help for her little girl. And she gets her help. "Oh, woman, great is your faith. Let it be to you as you desire." Jesus does care about her. It's got to be that his apparent rudeness was some lesson in contrast to startle the disciples so they could see their own cold, calloused ways. He sets her daughter free, and he gives evidence that God's kingdom is for everybody, even Canaanites. Who does the world consider dogs today? Some despise drunks who stumble down the streets and lie in the gutters. Some countries have their untouchables, the ones who are born in the wrong caste and are given the worst of jobs and no education. When I was in Cambodia, as in many other countries at that time, the ones who were despised were the people with AIDS. Most people assumed they'd been drug addicts or prostitutes or done something else wrong. They were often treated as lepers, unclean, untouchable, dangerously infectious. There was a lot of miseducation, misunderstanding, and just plain genuine fear. I met a man who'd been chased from his own home by his parents when they found out he had AIDS. I guess they were scared too. 36 million people have died from AIDS. That's a lot of people. And they estimate that about that same amount of people are living with AIDS today. Sub-Saharan Africa is especially hard hit. About 1 in 20 people in that region have it. 1 in 20. And it hits the little ones too. Every day another 700 children get the disease. AIDS is a deep and terrible heartache for anybody who has it. It does not need the additional crushing blow of people despising you for having it. And why should we ever despise someone else? Are they really that much lower than us? Are they worse in some way? We should look down on them? Isaiah 1:6 describes our condition, our sinful condition, like this. "From the sole of the foot even to the head, there's no soundness in it, but wounds and bruises and putrefying sores." Ooh, sounds terrible, but that's how it describes us. We have no cause to despise someone else. We ourselves are despicable. We too deserve to die from our infectious, life-destroying disease. And yet, God demonstrates His own love towards us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Romans 5:8. That's unconditional, absolutely precious, and perfect love that can be the rock-solid foundation through which we care for others. Whether the disease is the person's fault or not, God has called us to love. Romans 5 also says, the love of God has been poured out in our hearts. That's Romans 5:5. That means we can love anybody because Jesus is in our hearts. When we lived in Cambodia, much of the time we'd go down to a slum near our house. The people lived in bamboo shacks on poles just barely above the sewer water. It was really, really smelly and awfully crowded. One of the ladies we met there was Minit. She lived in a tiny room about 6 feet by 10 with her baby girl. She was a part of Julie's group of ladies who crocheted sweaters and tablecloths to sell for a livelihood. She listened in to the Bible stories too. Sometimes she joined the little worship groups on Saturday morning. She even told us she wanted to be baptized. Our friend Yinya, who often translated for us or led the Bible study, he also befriended Minit. And one day, he decided to give Minit's little girl a new name, a Bible name, and he called her Ruth. After a while, Julie noticed that Minit was looking really thin. She'd had a bad cough for a long time, and so Julie said, "Let me take you to the clinic." She didn't want it. Julie decided to ask her again after a while, and Minit again, she shook her head and said, "No, I don't want to go." A bit later, one of the other ladies came up and said, "I think she has AIDS. That's why she doesn't want to go. She's afraid to find out." It made sense. Her body couldn't fight the cough for a long, long time. She was really thin. It just seemed to match up. Julie kept listening, and she learned that Minit had been a barmaid for a while. Maybe she contracted something there. It wasn't likely that she'd ever been married to little Ruth's father because he was long gone. So not much later, Julie again tried to convince Minit to go to try to find out what to do. She told her, "You just can't stay sick day after day." There at the clinic, Minit's blood was drawn and then taken away. And she sat there waiting, so nervous. And Julie just kept trying to encourage her. And finally the nurse came back and she sat down and kindly and compassionately let Minit know that yes, she was HIV positive. Minit just slumped. She looked up at Julie and as pitiful as could be, she said, "You must really hate me." That's all she could get out. And Julie just wrapped her arms around her and said, "Of course I don't. I love you all the more." And they drove back to the slums, just hardly talking. You see, for Minit, it was a death sentence. There was no medicine available then. Her mind was focused on her little girl. What was going to happen to Ruth once she was gone? Julie was pretty busy for about a week. And meanwhile, Minit got weaker and weaker. When Julie walked into Minit's little room, she saw how quickly she was failing. And after visiting with her, she went over to the other ladies in the crochet group to set up a schedule to feed Minit and to take care of little Ruth. And they smiled and told her, "We've been doing that for a long time." They were a family. Finally, Minit had to be taken to the hospital. We really prayed, wondering what we would do with little Ruth. We had our own 2 children and Rota, our Cambodian boy, and we didn't feel ready to adopt this little girl. No one in Minit's family came forward to give her a home. There was the risk that little Ruth had AIDS too. We passed the word around to our missionary friends. Maybe somebody could help her. And one day, as we were getting into our car to visit Minit at the hospital, an Australian lady pulled up out of the blue on a taxi into our driveway. "I just crossed paths with your friends Arnold Hooker in the middle of the city. He told me about Minit and the baby that needs a home. We've been thinking about, we'd like to take her into our home." We were really surprised. "Hop in, we're going to see her now." And the lady told us more about herself as we drove. They were missionaries living near our friends, told us how long they'd been there. "And by the way, my name is Ruth." Our mouths just dropped open. That's the little girl's name. We knew God was behind this. And so we walked into the hospital, surrounded the crude bed that Minit was lying on. She was so skinny. She could hardly talk. "Minit, this is the lady that would like to give your little girl a home. She's willing to take her in as her own girl." We could see the relief just flood over Minit's face. For her, a foreigner meant money, enough for food, education, and love for her little girl. No risk of little Ruth being used as a servant to the rest of the adopting family. She was suddenly completely at peace, and she could go to sleep. Little Ruth went to live with Australians. The father, Jeff and Ruth, and their kids, they loved her so much. She grew fat and happy. And Minette died, resting in Jesus' arms. She'd experienced his love through Julie and the small church family in the slums. At the very end, she felt his hands just reach down and pull the Australians and her daughter and her into one big hug. And Minette's not the only one who died. Little Ruth also died. She had AIDS. She lived a few happy years and then she passed away. I'm sure that really broke her new family's hearts. And yet someday soon, when Jesus comes again, he's going to raise that little girl and her mother too. And then those of us who put our trust in Jesus Christ, we're going to join them in one happy dance around the throne of our Savior and Lord. I cannot wait. In the meantime, there's a whole lot of people out there who need our love, especially those that are typically despised. What do you think God would like to do yet through his people before he returns? Don't you think he'd like us to be known by the whole world as the people who love and help those with AIDS? Don't you think he'd like his church to be reported in the papers as the best friend of alcoholics, drug addicts, prostitutes, and the untouchables? Jesus had that kind of reputation. I'd like to have it too. So what will you do? ASAP Ministries doesn't have a big work among people with AIDS. We do have a small shelter in Cambodia that provides a roof, food, and some job skills for a handful of people. I've been there once. I met those precious people, some single ladies with children, and one whole family. We worshiped God together because they'd learned about his love. They make and sell little butterflies. I've got a few of them here. There's a big one and some that like little bookmarks. The kids at some of the places like ASI and GYC and different places, they love to get them for a small donation. But the ladies, because the ladies, they make them there as part of their livelihood. It's beautiful. And when I see the butterflies, I think of how God, he takes us. We're ugly caterpillars, despicable sinners, and he turns us into something beautiful. You can help us, help those people by visiting asapministries.org. I'm sure you can find other organizations that are doing wonderful things to help men, women, and children that have been attacked by this deadly virus, AIDS. And I'm confident that some of you who are listening should devote the rest of your lives to take healing and hope to those who are HIV positive. We hear a lot less about AIDS in America these days, but there are still 1 million living with it right here. And that means there's still great needs, opportunities to volunteer or serve full time. But surely overseas, just thousands and thousands of more opportunities for you to serve. Go, let your heart be broken with the things that break God's heart. And right where you are, keep your eyes open for those who are despised. Are you a student at school? Watch for the boy or girl that all the children tease. Are you a teenager? Befriend the one who's left out of the circle of friends. Are you an adult? Search out the lonely and the sad. These are the ones to love. Let's together reach the world ASAP.